I stayed after my husband cheated during my pregnancy. Now I'm ready for revenge. I, 35F, have been with my husband, 40M, for 11 years. We've been married for 9. We have a 5-year-old child who is currently asleep upstairs, oblivious to the fact that their world is built on a foundation of rot. To understand why I am at this breaking point, you have to understand the level of calculated cruelty I have lived through. 5 years ago, I was in a hospital bed. I was exhausted, covered in sweat, and holding our newborn. It should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, while he was getting coffee, his phone started blowing up on the bedside table. I shouldn't have looked, but the notifications were constant. It was a woman. She was sending photos of her own ultrasound. She was telling him she was excited for their turn in a few months. I found out my husband had gotten another woman pregnant while I was literally in labor with our child. I am not a confrontational person. I am a keep-the-peace person. I sat in that hospital bed, looking at my baby, and I felt my soul go cold. I didn't say anything for months. I went through the motions of being a new mother while carrying a mountain of radioactive secrets. When I finally gathered the courage to confront him, I expected a lie. I expected him to beg for forgiveness. Instead, he just looked at me with a blank expression. He didn't deny it. He didn't offer an explanation. He just stayed silent, as if my heartbreaking was just background noise to his day. The postpartum period was a descent into a darkness I didn't know existed. I was struggling with severe depression, the kind where the walls feel like they're closing in and you forget what the sun feels like. And that's when the mask truly slipped. My husband didn't just check out, he became a monster. He started telling me, in vivid detail, that he had settled for me. He told me that I was the placeholder, the safe option, and that the woman he truly loved, Nikki, was the one he should have been with all along. He eventually admitted that he and Nikki had been involved since 2009. That was before he even met me. He explained, with a chilling lack of empathy, that he never committed to her back then because she had trouble maintaining pregnancies. She had several miscarriages, and he wanted a sure thing, for a legacy. Once she finally carried a child to term, he didn't need the facade of our marriage anymore. I wasn't his wife. I was a biological insurance policy. The disparity in how he treats our lives is what eats at me the most. I see the bank statements. I see the social media posts I'm not supposed to find. When it's Nikki's birthday, or their child's birthday, the world stops. They go to Miami. They fly to the Caribbean. They eat at 5-star restaurants where the wine costs more than my weekly groceries. He posts photos of them smiling on beaches, looking like the perfect, golden family. When my birthday comes around, nothing. Not a card. Not a happy birthday muttered in passing. Last year, I spent my birthday cleaning the kitchen while he was out buying jewelry for her. He has taken their child to Disney World multiple times. He buys the fast passes, the years, the whole experience. Meanwhile, back at our house, he refuses to even walk our child to the park at the end of the street. My child asks where Daddy is, and I have to make up lies about work trips, while I know he's currently riding Space Mountain with his real family. Our marriage is a hollowed-out shell. We live in the same house because neither of us wants to give up the equity yet, but we are strangers. The only time he speaks to me is to confirm the mortgage transfer. He doesn't ask how I am. He doesn't ask if our child has a fever or how school is going. He is a ghost that occasionally haunts the hallway. But it's not just the neglect. It's the fear. In the beginning, I tried to fight. I would wait up for him when he'd been gone for 3 days without a word. I would demand to know where he was. Those nights usually ended with me on the floor. He has been physically and emotionally abusive for years. He has hit me in front of our child. He has called me every name in the book until I believed them. I eventually stopped asking questions because I realized that my silence was the only thing keeping my ribs intact. The stress has physically destroyed me. I've had 3 hospital stays in the last 2 years for stress-induced heart palpitations and digestive issues that the doctors can't find a physical cause for. My hair is thinning. I look 10 years older than I am. He isolated me from my friends years ago, convinced me they were bad influences or that they secretly hated me, so now I have no one to talk to. It's just me, my child, and this crushing weight. Then came the final insult. Through some mutual acquaintances and a bit of digging, I found out that my husband's mother came to the U.S. about 3 years ago. She came through one of the recent humanitarian parole programs, along with several of his close friends. My husband never told me. The woman who is supposedly my mother-in-law has been living in this country for 3 years, and I only found out 2 months ago. She lives with Nikki. She spends every day babysitting Nikki's child, my husband's other child. She goes on those Caribbean vacations with them. She is a grandmother to that child, providing the love and support that my child has never felt. My child has never even met her. She has been 30 miles away for over 1,000 days, and my husband has never once brought her to our house. He has intentionally kept his mother away from my child, as if our life together is a secret he's ashamed of, or a mistake he's trying to erase. The resentment I feel is like a physical heat in my chest. I think about all the times I sat in the ER alone. I think about the bruises I hid with concealer. I think about my child crying at the window because Daddy's truck isn't pulling in. And then I think about his mother and his friends. I know their status is tied to specific sponsorship and paperwork that is fragile. I know that if I were to file a formal report with ICE, citing certain inconsistencies or simply drawing attention to the group, his entire, real life would implode. His mother would be looking at deportation. His friends, who have helped him hide his double life and have mocked me behind my back, would be caught in the crosshairs. His world, the one he built on my back, would crumble. He would lose his childcare. He would lose his social circle. He would have to deal with the chaos and fear that I have lived in for a decade. I haven't done it. I just stare at the screen. One part of me says that this is a bridge too far. That his mother didn't choose her son's actions, though she certainly chose to enable them by ignoring my child's existence. That calling federal authorities on people is a nuclear option that makes me the villain. People say, when they go low, you go high. But I've been going high for 11 years, and all it's gotten me is a broken body and a lonely child. Why does he get to have a perfect, subsidized life with his mother and his mistress, while I'm left to pick up the pieces of the family he discarded? Why should I protect the legal status of people who view my child as an inconvenience to be ignored? I'm overwhelmed by the unfairness of it all. I want him to feel the panic I felt when I was in that hospital bed. I want him to feel the isolation I feel every night in the silent house. I want to burn it all down just so he has to stand in the ashes with me. So, tell me. After the physical abuse, the years of cheating, the secret second family, the financial abandonment, and the intentional exclusion of my child from their own family, am I the asshole for even considering this? Am I crazy for wanting to use the only leverage I have left to make him feel a fraction of my pain? Update. It has been a few months since I wrote that post in my car with the ICE website open on my phone. I never actually submitted the tip that night. I sat there for almost an hour staring at the screen while my hands shook, and eventually I closed the browser and went inside because my child woke up crying. At the time I thought that meant the anger had passed. It hadn't. It just changed shape. Reading the responses I got forced me to sit with a reality I had been avoiding for years. A lot of people pointed out something that should have been obvious long ago. The biggest problem in my life wasn't my husband's mistress, his friends, or his mother. It was the man living under the same roof as me who had spent a decade tearing me down while living a completely different life somewhere else. Once that sank in, something in me shifted. For years I had been stuck in survival mode. I focused on getting through each day quietly enough that it wouldn't turn into another argument or another bruise. Revenge fantasies were the only thing that made me feel like I had any power left. They were small sparks in a very dark place. But revenge isn't always loud or impulsive. Sometimes it's quiet and patient. The first real step happened about 2 weeks after my original post when I had another doctor's appointment. I had been dealing with stress-related heart palpitations for months, and the cardiologist asked the same question every doctor eventually asks: what exactly is going on in your life right now? For once I didn't downplay it. I told him about everything. The cheating, the violence, the second family, the nights my husband disappeared for days while I stayed home pretending everything was normal for our child. The doctor didn't react dramatically. He just listened and then recommended something I had never seriously considered before: a domestic abuse advocate connected to the hospital. That meeting changed the direction of everything. The advocate helped me understand the situation in a way that made my stomach turn. I had been thinking about revenge against people around my husband, but legally and strategically, the real leverage was sitting much closer to home. Years of abuse, financial records, his second household, and the fact that he had essentially abandoned our child while still legally married created a much bigger problem for him than anything I could accomplish with an anonymous phone call. For the first time in years I started documenting things. Not in an emotional way, but in a calm, organized way. Dates, bank transfers, travel receipts, screenshots, medical records from hospital visits after incidents he caused. I even had the AirTag location history saved showing how often he stayed overnight at Nikki's house while claiming to be on work trips. Once I started gathering everything together, the scale of it shocked me. There were nearly 5 years of evidence showing that he had been financially supporting another household while contributing the bare minimum to the home where his legal wife and child lived. Photos from social media that showed him vacationing with them while our child's preschool tuition was being paid entirely from my salary. Messages from him telling me he settled for me and that the other woman was his real partner. For so long I had been told I was dramatic and unstable that I believed it. Seeing the evidence laid out chronologically made it impossible to ignore what had actually happened. After that I spoke with a lawyer. Walking into that office was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. I half expected the lawyer to shrug and tell me there was nothing that could be done. Instead he spent 2 hours going through the documents I brought and asking careful questions about our finances and living situation. By the time we finished, the plan was very clear. The divorce filing would not be simple, but it was going to be devastating for my husband. Because we had been married for 9 years and had a child together, the court would examine the entire financial picture. The money he had been spending on trips, gifts, and living expenses for his other household wasn't invisible the way he seemed to think. A lot of it had come from accounts connected to our marriage. My lawyer called it dissipation of marital assets. In simple terms, it meant he had been spending family money on an affair and another household while neglecting his legal responsibilities. Judges tend to react very badly to that. Filing the paperwork felt surreal. For years I had believed leaving would destroy my life. When the documents were finally submitted, the only thing I felt was a strange calm. My husband had no idea what was coming. He found out when he was served at work. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later from one of his coworkers who happens to be married to someone in my department. Apparently he was furious and confused. Up until that moment he had assumed I would stay quiet forever. The reaction at home that evening was explosive. He stormed into the house demanding to know what I had done and accusing me of trying to ruin him. The same man who had ignored me for years suddenly wanted to talk non-stop about betrayal and loyalty. For the first time I didn't shrink during one of his outbursts. I told him calmly that all communication would go through lawyers from that point forward. Watching the realization dawn on his face was almost surreal. He had spent years believing I had no power. Now everything he had hidden was about to be examined in court records. The next few weeks were chaos for him. Once the divorce process started, financial disclosures became mandatory. That meant every account, every large purchase, every transfer of money had to be documented. The expensive vacations with Nikki, the luxury gifts, the money sent to support that household, it all became part of the record. The situation with his mother also surfaced during that process. Remember how I mentioned she had been living in the country for 3 years without ever meeting my child? That fact turned out to be more relevant than I expected. My lawyer discovered that my husband had listed Nikki's address as the residence for certain sponsorship paperwork connected to his mother's immigration status. That meant the existence of his legal marriage and child living somewhere else created a complicated situation legally. I didn't need to call ICE. The contradictions were already sitting in official documents. Once lawyers on both sides began digging into the details, the pressure on my husband multiplied quickly. Suddenly the double life he had carefully maintained for years was impossible to keep separate. Financial records tied the households together. Legal filings connected his responsibilities to both families. The story he had been telling different people stopped making sense once everything was in writing. Apparently the fallout reached Nikki pretty quickly. I never contacted her directly, but from what I heard through mutual acquaintances she had believed my husband was already separated and nearly finished with the divorce years ago. Finding out that he had continued living with his wife while presenting their relationship as a future marriage did not go over well. Their situation started unraveling almost immediately. By the time the first court hearing arrived, the confident man who used to lecture me about how lucky I was to have him looked very different. Legal fees, financial scrutiny, and the collapse of his carefully balanced double life had taken a toll. The judge's reaction during that hearing was the moment when everything truly shifted. Family courts see a lot of messy situations, but certain patterns tend to stand out. Evidence showing that a spouse diverted marital funds to support an affair partner while neglecting their child is one of those patterns. The judge didn't raise their voice or make a dramatic speech. They simply reviewed the financial documents and asked several direct questions about the travel expenses and property payments connected to the second household. My husband's answers were weak and inconsistent. By the end of that session, temporary orders were issued that changed my life overnight. Full physical custody of our child was granted to me while the case continues, and he was ordered to begin paying substantial child support immediately. On top of that, restrictions were placed on how marital assets could be used until the final settlement. Walking out of that courthouse felt unreal. For the first time in years I wasn't waiting for the next explosion or wondering when he would disappear again. The law had stepped in and created boundaries he couldn't ignore. The aftermath on his side was apparently dramatic. Supporting 2 households while paying legal fees and court-ordered support payments quickly became unsustainable. The trips, the luxury dinners, the expensive lifestyle he had been showing off online stopped almost immediately. People who had happily enjoyed his generosity began distancing themselves when the money disappeared. The irony isn't lost on me. For years I fantasized about one phone call destroying his world. In the end, it wasn't a phone call that did it. It was simply refusing to stay silent and letting the truth exist in the open. My life looks very different now. The house feels peaceful in a way it never did before. My child doesn't wait at the window for a truck that may or may not arrive. We go to the park together on weekends. Sometimes we get ice cream afterward just because we can. The health problems that had been sending me to the hospital have started improving too. Stress doesn't vanish overnight, but it's amazing what happens when the constant fear in your own home disappears. People who knew parts of the story have reacted with shock as the details become clearer. The image my husband maintained for years didn't survive contact with reality once everything was documented. As for revenge, the feeling is still there in some ways, but it isn't the burning anger that had me sitting in a car with a government website open on my phone. What happened instead was colder and far more effective. The man who told me he settled for me is now facing the consequences of every lie he built that second life on. The financial stability he used to impress everyone around him is under court supervision. The image of the perfect family he displayed online has fallen apart under legal scrutiny. Meanwhile, I'm finally building a life that doesn't revolve around surviving someone else's cruelty. People expected the quiet wife to stay quiet forever. They were wrong.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.